I remember when the Back to the Future ride came out, I remember thinking, I've never seen anything like this before. I've never experienced anything like this before because it was so incredibly immersive. From the moment that you walk into the queue, and then you go into the pre-show, and you were just surrounded by the ride, and you were a character in the movie. That's what was happening. It was great.
That was precisely the purpose, which was to make you feel like you had entered into the movie and were becoming one of the characters in the movie.
Yeah. And I think, I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, I think that ride did it better than any other movie-themed attraction I've ever been a part of, where you are actually the star of the show.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm proud of it, and I'm game to do it again anytime.
Yeah.
One day, out of the blue, I got a call from Sherry McKenna, who was working for Universal Studios Parks Department, and she said, "I'd like your suggestions for someone to direct and take over this movie because it's having problems." And I said, well, how about me? She said, well, gee, we hadn't thought about you. And I said, well, I invented the simulator ride back in 1975, so I would love to do it, and it would be a real coup to work on this ride, and I'd love to work with Steven Spielberg because I had worked with him on Close Encounters, and I kind of knew how he thought as a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, okay, well, make us a proposal. And during that time, there was also a simultaneous proposal being prepared by Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's effects company.
Oh, sure.
And I just had a different take on what I thought the problems were. And I saw the proposal that was being prepared by ILM, and my proposal was quite different. And a central piece of the proposal had to do with the movie process itself, of projecting a 70 millimeter IMAX movie into a dome, and all of the distortion you get, because they had planned to have 12 8-passenger DeLorean cars parked in this big dome.
Sure.
On several different levels. So each DeLorean would be looking at the screen from a different angle, and I realized immediately that if there were vertical lines like telephone poles or straight buildings or things like that, they became horribly distorted in the dome, and the only good car was the one right in the middle. So I said, well, one of the first things I'm going to propose to you is we make a movie that has no straight lines.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so we designed this kind of crazy, Hill Valley architecture that was all curvy lines, kind of 1950s boomerang style architecture. So even the light poles on the streets were curved and bent like a question mark.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't notice that they were being distorted. So that was one thing. And then I said, well, I've looked at a lot of these IMAX movies now, and I'm seeing that if you have a bright daylight blue sky, it just floods the screen with light, and the blacks are destroyed, and there's no contrast, and brightness is already low, so it looks bad. So I said, only the few shots that I've seen in these IMAX movies are pretty much night shots, or edge-lit shots, or computer graphic shots. And so I would propose making the movie where it's all pretty dark, and the story happens at night. Number two.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then I said, well, you've got a lot of blurring and strobing that happens at 24 frames a second, because if you try to move the camera fast, the blurring and strobing is really objectionably bad in the IMAX Dome. And I said, well, I'm going to solve this problem with the oldest known trick in the cinematographer's handbook, which is that if something's blurring and strobing, put something in the foreground that's not moving very much.
Yeah.
It's a classic technique you'll see even back in movies like Casablanca, where if someone's coming into the restaurant and you need to pan over to someone else who's way 180 degrees over to the left, you have a waiter walk by in the foreground, so
sure.
that there's something in the shot that's not blurred. It's a
go.
very, very old trick, very well known. I said, well, okay, let's make a story that has something in the foreground that's not blurred. And so that's where the idea of chasing Biff came up. I said, we're going to chase another DeLorean car, and it's going to be right in the foreground most of the time, and it'll help us be able to pan and tilt and do all these dynamic motions that are required for a simulator ride to be effective.
I remember one of the best parts of the movie was the dinosaur and people just screaming in the theater, like just screaming in terror, but also joy. I just remember what a great moment that was when the DeLorean gets swallowed by the dinosaur. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, well, that was kind of a funny joke, but I talked Spielberg into allowing me to do that, and that was one of the design parameters, which was the camera had to be small enough to fit inside the dinosaur's mouth.
Yeah.
So they all had to be scaled the same. So we had the motion control system of the DeLorean, the motion control system of the camera itself, and then an additional 65-channel motion control system for the dinosaur itself, which was a big robot.
Did you get a chance to work with any of the original actors from Back to the Future for the ride?
I did direct the Biff stuff that's on the monitors in the car.
Oh, okay, great.
That had to be very tightly coordinated with the ride action. So he came to our studio and we shot him for all that material. But the pre-show, which was, Doc Brown in his lab, that was all shot at Universal with another crew.
Oh, okay, great. What was that fun though, to work with Tom Wilson and kind of like have him recreate?
He was a gas. Yeah. I don't know what Tom Wilson's up to these days, but I thought he was a wonderful guy. He was really sweet, really friendly, super talented, and really put out 100% for us.
Oh, so that's great. Do you have any pieces of Back to the Future the ride that you sort of have as a souvenir from that time?
Yeah, I have one of the DeLorean car models right on my desk.
That's great. That's so great.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping you'd say. I was hoping you'd say, "Oh yeah, I've got one." And that's that must be so fun to sit and look at when you're sitting there at work and just knowing what that was and knowing what, part of the theme park history that was. That's great.
Yeah, no, it's really great and I like it. And it's one of my it's a moment in my life that I'm really proud of because I'm a filmmaker, I'm a writer, I'm a director, I make movies. I've had my trials and tribulations in Hollywood trying to improve Hollywood itself and trying to improve the nature of a movie experience. And when the Back to the Future ride came along, which was in this giant, it's basically a flight simulator with hydraulic DeLorean cars. And I thought, well, this is just going to be a gas because I know how to do this. I invented the basic idea behind it. And this, to me, is an immersive cinema experience. And throughout all the years that have gone from then until now, it's never really been reviewed as cinema at all. It's like there are great movies, there are great moments in the history of cinema where people got really scared or, Lon Chaney, came at the camera with fangs or any number of things that have happened throughout the history of cinema that have evoked an audience response. And I think the Back to the Future ride is a powerful moment that's all about cinema. Kaboom!